Good afternoon, everyone, and good morning to the folks over on the West Coast. Welcome to Evaluation Information at Your Fingertips. This webinar is hosted by the Sexual Violence Justice Institute and the Minnesota Coalition Against Sexual Assault, with support from the Office of Violence Against Women Rural Technical Assistance Program and the Office of Justice Programs in Minnesota. I'm Jessica Jerney. I'm one of your friends in evaluation, and before we get started, I just want to hand it over to Meghan to discuss some housekeeping.
Hi, I'm Meghan. So I just wanted to start out by saying we want this to be a dialogue, but we know that this format is not perfect for this type of interactivity. So we just want to first make a deal. We're going to do our best to share material that is interesting, challenges you, and gets you thinking, reacting, and hopefully you'll come up with some new ways to apply what we were talking about today. So just to get us going, I want to remind everyone that all phone lines are muted, and we want to use the chat bar at any time to ask a question if you want to share ideas or just ask a question. And then we're going to look at all of the different questions at the end of the webinar and answer them. So we're not going to talk about them as we go through. If there is something really pressing, we have an assistant that's helping us with our chat box. And then we also want to note that this webinar will be recorded, and we'll make the link and the slides available as well as the resources. So some resources were emailed out to you all today, and I'm going to be referring to them a couple times throughout the webinar. So if you want to pull those up, or you can always just look at them later, because a lot of the information is also in the webinar slides. But the resources will just allow you to have an opportunity to use some of the different skills you learned today, and also just have some more extensive information. So first, just to help us practice with the chat box, let's just have some sharing on where are you calling from and what are you looking forward to learning about how to evaluate. So we've already had some people share in. They're from Minnesota, which is great. We have local people. We have some people from Richmond. We have some people from Arizona. We have some people from Colorado. And we have a lot of different interests in what people are looking to evaluate. So some are just in the beginning stages of their SART, so they want to just learn how to start evaluating from the beginning as they go, which is a really good idea to get it started from the get-go. And a lot of people are interested in their effectiveness. So those are all great ways. So thank you for putting those in, and feel free to put in as many questions as you want as we go through.
So you may be wondering, who is the Sexual Violence Justice Institute anyway? The Sexual Violence Justice Institute equips multidisciplinary teams and allied professionals across the country and the country's territories with the concepts, tools, training, and resources needed to create a victim-centered response to sexual violence within their local communities. This is who we are. I'm Jessica Jerney. I am the Evaluation and Research Coordinator for the Sexual Violence Justice Institute. I provide support and training for teams across the country and territories. And I specialize in supporting teams in doing evaluation and using research. I love making evaluation practical and useful for folks. I also conduct evaluation and research projects to inform the work of the Sexual Violence Justice Institute.
So hi again, I'm Meghan Rosenkranz, and I am the Research and Evaluation Specialist on the membership side of MNCASA. And so my role focuses on designing, delivering, and coordinating the evaluation of MNCASA programs and services in membership and prevention. I also provide training and technical assistance on evaluation and research development utilization. And then in this webinar, we're also going to have 2 guest speakers that are going to have some really great field examples for us. And as we go along, they'll introduce themselves, so we can do that later.
Thanks for being here, PaHoua and Heidi. So conducting evaluation of your activities can feel like a momentous task, but it doesn't have to be. In this webinar, we're going to share 3 easy, everyday opportunities that you can use to collect information that will help your team reflect on your work. We will share activities and tools that you can use to support the collection of information in the following areas: documenting feedback, visualizing your system's response, and tracking information to see changes in the response over time. We will start this conversation by discussing our approach to evaluation. Because I believe evaluation is a very normal human thing, something we do every day, I like to start off the discussion of what is evaluation by telling a story about humans. Sometimes I reference taste testing frozen pizza, other times identifying a good place to eat fish. Today, I want to share the ancient Indian folktale, The Blind Man and the Elephant. This is a story, just briefly, I'm going to briefly share that this story is about a group of blind folks, but in the more modern case pictured here, a group of people with blindfolds on who have never come across an elephant before and are trying to figure out what the elephant is by touching it. Each person feels a different part of the elephant's body, but only one part, such as the side or the tusk. As you can imagine, the person touching the side is like, it's a wall. And the person touching the tusk is, it's a spear. So they are all describing the elephant based on their partial experience, and their descriptions are in complete disagreement about what an elephant is. The moral of this story is that humans have a tendency to project their partial experiences as the whole truth, and ignoring other people's partial experiences. And since this is an everyday reality for humans, we have to acknowledge that, but we also need to, it's an opportunity for us to realize that we have distinctly different perspectives on the same thing. And to learn the truth, we must really put all these parts together. And evaluation really helps us do this in a reality testing kind of way, by putting multiple perspectives together to help us see the bigger picture. This creation of collective understanding is really essential for a better evaluation, but also a better system response. To get a little more concrete about what evaluation is, my personal definition of evaluation is a facilitation of a joint reflection process. For me, evaluation is a tool. We ask questions, we gather information, and we make changes. It helps us continually learn and grow and improve. So some of the basics of evaluation as I see it are, evaluation is basically just value judgments we make every day. In the end, we're just asking questions like, what is good, better, and best? Have things gotten better or worse? How can they be improved? Evaluation is also a systematic approach that is created in the planning phase to gather and analyze information in an established way using the criteria that you have identified. This gives our evaluation rigor. Evaluation should be the purpose of evaluation is for learning. This is not a high-stakes process. It is not about performance review. Just like in your team meetings, we should be focusing on the system and not on individuals. Also, we use information we have collected to help fill gaps in knowledge and help us understand the big picture, which may be what is an elephant, or what is the experience of victim survivors when they participate in your response. We should use this information to learn and make changes. This is our obligation. This is the idea that your actions should be informed by knowledge from evidence, rather just than beliefs or perceptions of what the response looks like from your perspective. All right, lessons in slide moving. I'm going to start by, continue by discussing our process of evaluation. Since we've talked about what evaluation is, let's talk about how we can approach it. I believe there's a lot of power in process, and if you work on a sexual assault response team, you know that power is in the process. in evaluation, this is how we create a rigorous process despite the limitations that we all face. And we really all face different limitations and challenges in doing evaluation. I've created a 4-step process: plan, do, reflect, and apply, really inspired by John Dewey's experiential learning process that highlights, at its core that evaluation is simple and reflective in nature. The basic components of evaluation, we really start with planning. But why is planning important? You might be thinking, I just want to do a survey and figure out what people think. Even if you want to just do a survey, planning is important. And it's important to think about what you want to do before you figure out how to do it. Planning this phase really engages the team and other stakeholders, which could include like your supervisors or victim survivors you want to engage in this process. It creates a path for success, right? And it helps keep your team focused and on that path. So that this all works to create buy-in and a way of keeping him engaged. And it helps you stay focused on the purpose of your evaluation. And purpose comes from identifying your evaluation questions. Because evaluation is really about exploring and investigating, we phrase our purpose in a question. And this question is what guides you throughout and keeps you on track. It's tempting to gather all the info when you're out there in the field, but we really need to create a question that is really, and tools that are focused on answering our question. And this is the place where we also want to get really clear on what we want to know. And we want to get really narrow as well in our question. We don't want to take on too much, because if you get big right away, it's really going to get hard to get going or even to complete the project. And this is really where having like an evaluation planning group or working with your team is going to help. For instance, if you have recently in the last year or two instituted a trauma-informed interviewing policy for law enforcement, some of your questions might include, to what extent has trauma-informed interviewing policy changed the law enforcement response? Or in what ways has trauma-informed interviewing changed the experience of victim survivors? Those are really good narrow questions that you can do and you can answer. You want to make this stuff doable and have some very clear sources of information. So sources of our information are like identifying who or what can give us the answer to our question, right? And when we're deciding on how to approach collecting the information, which I call methods. And so method is like how you're collecting the information to answer your question. It includes the approach. So let's say you want to do a survey, you do. And then the tool, so you have to also develop the survey as well. So that's a survey tool. So you start with what you want to get out of your evaluation, and then you develop around that. You don't develop the tool first, and then develop evaluation around that. So, for instance, if you want to understand people's experience, you might want to do interviews because that gives you, or something like an interview that will give you some really rich context and some quotes. If you want to understand people's satisfaction with the service or changes in numbers, that kind of thing, you might want to use a survey or review existing documents, something like that. I usually like to use a mix personally, but if you're just starting out in evaluation, or you feel like you have a lot of limitations, it's okay to start small. Even if you interview 6 victim survivors, that will be a good start to better understanding their experience with your work. And their perspective is critical. In this phase, you also don't want to forget what might be some challenges to the methods that you choose or challenges in reaching participants. Who could help you develop tools or help you collect information? Who can you connect with in what ways can you connect with possible participants? The next section is do, so that seems pretty obvious, right? In do, we're collecting the information. So we're based on the methods that we've chosen. So if we decided to do interviews with victim survivors to understand their experience with how their experience has changed because of the trauma-informed protocol. We'd have interviews, but then we would create questions, and so that's the tool that goes with the interview. And so this is where those folks are collecting information, and once we collect all the information, we're organizing the responses so we can really bring that into the reflection section, where this is where your team really is its strongest, where we bring the information together, we learn from what we have found, and we ask ourselves some critical questions of what are we doing well, what could we do better, what worked, what didn't, and then how do we use this? So that really pushes us into the apply area of the evaluation process. And this is your action planning stage. And for me, if you don't do this step, you might as well not even do the evaluation at all, because it is so important to apply and use what you have learned from the evaluation. People have entrusted you with the information, and sometimes they're sharing their personal experience. And that is a gift that you owe that to them to use that information to improve your system response. So this is a section where we're really we're putting that information into our work, but we're also celebrating successes. Maybe you share it with the local newspaper and some of your successes. So that's a basic overview of evaluation. We can talk more about that. I'm certainly available for questions. We also have some resources to guide people through that. But I really want to focus the most of today on the do part of the evaluation process. The three methods, again, that we're highlighting today are collecting and documenting feedback, visualizing your work, gathering existing information, and tracking it over time. Meghan and I wanted to highlight these methods because they are underutilized, but brilliant in their simplicity. They are particularly useful in rural spaces and in SARTs because resources really vary based on the communities. And I really personally believe that communities are well equipped to assess their response. And there's power in people. The people where we work together, we know each other, we use our community connections, but we also have an opportunity using evaluation to build new connections. And while in some communities we might not see a lot of cases, you'll have the opportunity to collect good information on the cases you do have.
All right, so I'm going to introduce the first method that we're going to talk about today, and that's collecting and documenting feedback. And so the first method is probably the one you're doing already right now without even realizing it. So as we go through this webinar, we have all of the same information to introduce all the methods. So we have skill levels, so we're saying this is a pretty easy one. And the best use for this method is to identify self-reported areas of growth, impact, and challenges, and also identify gaps. And so the process of this method includes thoughtfully and deliberately asking questions of others and yourself to evaluate an event, program, or policy. And most importantly, documenting what you learned to make changes. So this can be simple things as after an event, just jotting down how many people came. Did we raise as much money as we had hoped? Did people enjoy it as much as last year? And just these are the simple things that you probably are doing already. But this is where you can really take the information that you're already collecting and documenting and then analyze it and have a product to make changes for the coming future. So this is where there's often a missed opportunity. So something happens, you talk amongst yourselves or you jot some notes down on what went wrong, and then the next year when the event or the training or even a case or a situation happens, you do the same thing you did without learning from what you did the year before. And this is even something that I've noticed at our organization and at many different organizations. It's just very easy to come across because you track it, and then the next year, whether it's a staff change or you even just forget that you did the notes and took the evaluation, the changes aren't actually made. So as I go forward, we're going to do a sample diary analysis to just show you, this is just one way to collect the feedback and then make some changes. So I'm going to use an example of a volunteer training evaluation. So this example is just going to pretend that a rape crisis center is hosting a 40-hour advocacy training for new advocates. So the head of the training just generally includes a standard evaluation survey to assess what the new advocates thought about the training and how much they learned from the training. After the training, she fills out her own evaluation of the training and is just the general notes of how she felt the training went. She uses these notes to go to a meeting, prepares what she felt like happened at the training, how the advocates seemed to go, and then that's the end of it. But as I want to point out, there's a lot that you can take from these simple notes and prepare for the next training. So what I want to show is how we compile the notes, we can find opportunities for change, and more importantly, you can share the findings. So the same advocate, after they have done the training, she met with her agency and her supervisors, and she shares how the advocates have been doing. She then compiles all of her information, and she has a report. And so I attached a resource as just one simple way about how you can think about organizing your data. And so as this chart shows, I just have it organized by what is being evaluated, what did we observe, learn, and then action steps for change. And I want to put the most attention on the action steps for change, just because the first two, they can be organized a bunch of different ways, and there's different ways that you can, however you feel more comfortable documenting what is being evaluated and what did you learn. But the biggest part, and where I think people forget to do the biggest step, is the action step. So in the resource that I attached, we have in the what is being evaluated, I have as the volunteer advocate training that I discussed. And what did they observe or learn? So they were looking at to what extent did the new advocates understand the concepts taught in training, and what ways could the training be improved, and how do we recruit new volunteers? So one thing that in my example that they observed and learned is 3/4 of the attendees had little or no experience with sexual violence before the training. Most heard about volunteering through a lecture by their professor. Half of the volunteers had questions about the protocol for HROs and mandatory reporting after the training. So these are just a couple little facts that you can take afterwards and then decide how do you make the action steps for change. So what I said would be a really great way to organize these is just by organizing them by priority level. So we have high, medium, low. And so a high priority level for an action for change is immediate change needed. So this is something like half of the volunteers had questions about protocol for HROs and mandatory reporting. So that shows you that the training that was done, maybe the advocates just didn't pick up on it as much. So something you need to do is just maybe have a little refresher or just update the rest of the staff that this is something that people are struggling with. So that's something that is needed change. Medium change, I just said a change needed in 3 to 6 months, but depending on your evaluation, this could be extended. But this is just something that a change is needed soonish, but it's not something that has to happen in exactly right now. So something about, like most heard about the volunteering through a local professor. So that would be a great way to maybe reach out to more professors to have presentations. And then a low action would be something that maybe needs to be changed and needs an action step, but is not something as soon as the other ones. So maybe something about, you know, if it was only one professor had outreach, then finding different areas or different means of communication to see how you could shape the different volunteer trainings. And the one thing you also want to note from the documents that you've taken are what are their successes. So I think this is another thing that often with evaluation, you're always looking for the problem. So you always are thinking about what did we do wrong, what can we change, but you also don't want to forget about what was the success that went really well. So we had, just pretending in this volunteer training, we had 25 people sign up, and the previous year there was only 15. So that's a success. So you can look at different ways that how did that maybe get a good sign up, and what are those things that we can do again. So again, just remember that this is just one way to collect your feedback and documentation, but I think it's just really a good reminder that we have a lot of notes that we just don't often organize. And so just thinking back on all of your different types of notes you take and how do you share them, and then just determining what are the action steps for change from those notes and continuing on.
The second method we're talking about today is visualizing your work, aka mapping, aka flow chart. I think we all call this different things, but it's really about visualizing your work, and it's all about telling a story, really. You're telling a story about your team, you're telling a story about your program. We're starting at step 1 and seeing where it goes. What's step 2? What's step 3? What's step 4? It's a really flexible method, and it can be really highly participatory. But it does such a great job of bringing multiple perspectives together to help understand the big picture. Along the way, you'll identify how successful your plan was, how many touch points there are, and any gaps in the process. There's multiple ways to use this. Folks have used it in community needs assessments, identifying gaps, understanding the impacts of programs, rates of occurrence, understanding your system's response. The power of visualizing your work is really making clear about what the collective knows and doesn't know about how your system or program runs. From there, you can use this information to improve. This was the case with our first guest speaker, Heidi. Her team story is one of my favorite instances of everyday and really accidental evaluation. Thank you for being here to share your story, Heidi.
Hi, everyone. Thank you. Like Jessica said, my name is Heidi Kettle. I am the Associate Dean of Students and Director of Residence Life at Concordia University in St. Paul. I have been a member of the larger Ramsey County protocol team since the colleges and universities were invited to participate. I'm also a Title IX investigator on our team, and kind of one of my roles within that is to be a member of this community organization. So like Jessica said, I am going to talk a little bit about how we have used mapping with the college and university response to sexual assault on campus, and how we were really incorporated into the larger protocol team, and how it has allowed us, the colleges and universities, to become more victim-centered. And so we're going to move on and I'm going to give you a little bit of history. If you would like to change the slide, please.
One second.
Thank you. Perfect. So just a brief history of the larger Ramsey County Sexual Assault Protocol team and how it incorporated the colleges and universities. In 2011 is when the idea came, and an outreach was made from the police officers, police departments, law enforcement, to connect with the campus security departments, because there's already some connections there. It should be noted that Ramsey County, we have about 17 colleges and universities within the county. It is the largest one in Minnesota. It's made up of 4-year, 2-year, public, private, so we're kind of all over the place. When it kind of took us about 4 years to regularly start meeting as a subcommittee and figuring out our place within the protocol team. And when we were there, we kind of just started taking a bunch of notes and decided what's missing, like why are we not feeling a part of the protocol team? What do we need to do? And a lot of the responses just came, they don't understand this or they don't understand that. And so we really realized that there is just an overall lack of understanding, is how we phrase it, of the Title IX process from the larger protocol team. And so with that, and it took us about 6 months to kind of decide what we wanted to share with everybody. And so in December of 2015, we hosted a lunch for law enforcement, same county's attorney's office members, advocates, and we invited them all to a campus. And we did a basic presentation on Title IX and influencing factors such as other laws, VAWA, Clery, and how those all kind of play a role in our part of doing a Title IX investigation on a college campus. From this presentation, there was a lot of walk away from our members who just said that they really did come away with a clear understanding of what happens on a campus, and they took us more seriously, and we felt more credible as our team on the protocol team. And then once we had that buy-in, we needed to find a way to map it and to really explain our process. And so what we did was we really focused on what the Title IX investigation looks like on a college campus. And you can move to the next slide. Perfect. And so this is our first two steps. What you can see with step one, we make immediate contact with SOS, our Sexual Offense Services, to get an advocate with the victim right away when they report to campus. The majority of the colleges and universities within Ramsey County do not have victim advocates on their campus, and so SOS has been a great resource to partner with. Many of the times, the advocates come right to campus to meet with the victim. We can also start our communication with law enforcement at this time, depending on how we get the information. So sometimes the victim does report to the police department first, and the police will assist them in making contact with the university. And then kind of moving into step two, if the student victim would like to make a report with the police department, we can explain that process with them as well. So we are able to share more community resources with victims right away. Advocacy is one of them, but we're also able to, if they have not had a state exam done yet, and what that process looks like and where they can go and what it would cost them or not cost them, what happens with that information. We're able to explain the process of filing a police report with law enforcement. A lot of times law enforcement will come to our campuses as well and take the report there. We can send them down to the station as well. So we've just become more victim-centered in the fact that we now know more community resources that are available. And at the same time, all these community resources, if a student goes there too, they're asked if they're college students in one of the local universities, and then they can explain, here's a Title IX contact or here's a security contact if you would like to contact someone on your campus to make a report as well. So it's been really helpful. And then it's also nice because we have consistency across the board within the college and university system in Ramsey County, where if one of our students on my campus were to have an incident on another campus, we can explain it's going to be a very similar process on their campus as well as far as what resources they're getting, and we can also give them a specific person to contact. And so, again, it has helped us become more victim-centered. We do, like we said, just another example too, we talked about the inclusion of advocacy at multiple points. We can also do this throughout the process as well during the investigations. And so we invite an advocate to be with the victim survivor the entire process if they would like to be. The other part that we've also talked about too is SANE documentation. And that's just been one area that we kept discussing as a college and university subcommittee were the SANE reports. We wanted to include SANE nurses and get their feedback, and also law enforcement and advocacy, and we invited our county attorney's office to have representation. And so what we did was we kind of sat down and said, what is the full purpose of having a SANE report submitted in a Title IX investigation on a college campus? And how can we become more victim-centered with what information we accept? Knowing that if there is a law enforcement gets involved with a police report, that it can become tricky too, because some of that information can be shared with another person or any other people that are involved with the case. And so what we wanted to do is just be really clear with what we would accept and not accept. And so we did create two handouts involving SANE protocol. And so one is given to the students, and it just describes what is all included in a report. The victim really wants to submit a report for a Title IX investigation. They would meet with our lead SANE nurse and go over what important pieces would be included. The college and universities also have a handout that we give to the investigators and on each of our campuses. And it just basically says that we're not going to accept the full SANE report, that we're not medical professionals, we don't know how to read it, we don't need to know all the information that's there, and that a report doesn't say if a policy violation has occurred or not. What we will accept is a SANE nurse coming in, and a lot of times it is our lead SANE nurse in Ramsey County with one of our hospitals, and to be interviewed in the process with information that the nurse and victim discuss and that they feel is relevant to the case. So we don't need to see all of the photographs. We don't need to get a really long document. We're going to just take, again, the information that the victim survivor would like to be included, and that they still feel like they have a say in what was included in their investigation process. So as we continue to develop these processes and kind of map out where we're going, the College and University Subcommittee team continues to meet about every other month. It's the off months that we do not have our larger protocol team. And then we also have really good attendance at our protocol team meetings as well. And just some successes that we've seen knowing and utilizing resources. Before this kind of came out and before we started mapping out what our Title IX investigation process looks like on campus, we realized that we really were not victim-centered and community-focused. We really didn't know all of the resources available within Ramsey County for our students. And so really incorporating them from the get-go has been amazing. We've also been able to promote campus and community events to larger groups, along with training and professional development opportunities. So we know that we can send posters out, or we get invited to more trainings across board. So that has been really helpful as well. And again, I think the biggest one is just consistency with procedures and response. The colleges and universities have all been on the same page. We've all had great input. And so I think now it's just kind of keeping that momentum and moving forward, which has been one of our challenges, is that we have had a couple of colleges and universities no longer be super active once the protocol was written and once we had it all mapped out. And so we would like to get them further involved. I think another challenge has been our turnover with police contacts, law enforcement. We know that positions change and people, law enforcement officers, get moved to different units. And so one is just keeping those relationships with law enforcement. And then of course, fitting in another meeting at a college and university is always can be a challenge as well. But I think we have a great group of people who have been pretty consistent over the years. And the buy-in from the larger team has been really well and continuing to be accepting from that point forward. So that is what I have for you and how we have used mapping to help the colleges and universities become a more active member in our larger Ramsey County Sexual Assault Protocol team, and also to help us become more victim-centered.
Great, thank you, Heidi. So Heidi shared with us how her team visualized the flow of the response and found opportunities to improve the campus response. The gaps in advocacy, the gaps in finding the gaps where they could support victim survivors and coordinate more with the other responders on the team is just brilliant and a great use of the flow chart or mapping process. It's also been great because it's catching on with other disciplines on the team. For instance, they're sharing their protocols right now in the teams, and the prosecution developed one. Law enforcement is strongly considering it. So way to start a trend, Heidi. We also wanted to share with you another form of mapping, though we don't really have time to go into details today. So we did share a link up there for you. It's called ripple effect mapping. It's a great way to track the impact of an intervention. Casey Baker in Southwest Minnesota uses it to understand the effects and connections made by a program in her community. If you want more information about ripple effect mapping or other types of approach to mapping, we can definitely connect with us here at SVJI and MNCASA, and we can definitely work with you. And Casey Baker is an old pro at this and certainly would be willing to talk you through what the process is in her rural communities.
Okay, so the next method and the final method we're going to talk about today is gathering existing information and tracking it over time. And so this is a method that can be very useful and exciting because you get to find the hidden gems of information you already have. So again, this is another one we want to look at, is kind of finding the low-hanging fruit we can find in our organization. And so we want to look at what data do we already have and what are we already collecting, and how can we either just analyze this data in a way that we haven't analyzed it before, or just shape it in a way that can answer some questions that we have been answering and we didn't even know we could be answering. And so there's two different graphics on the side, and these are just the products of this type of method. These aren't something that we want you to completely understand and look at because we know they're very small. But just for examples, you know, the table on the bottom just shows like some outcomes of reported cases from different years, and then the table on the top is 3 years of data on how soon following a sexual assault was a report made to law enforcement. So these are data that we have had our organization tell us that the data they're ready to gather for their grants. And so this is data that's already collected, and so how can you shape it? So the best reasons that we want to share as to why this is such an important information gathering technique and the best way that you can utilize this is, one way is, like I said, is using the grant data you already have and just shaping it in ways that you can gather new information. So many of you are probably already familiar with gathering a lot of grant data. And so one example might be the Office for Victims of Crime Victim Assistance Grant Program Performance Measures. So as some of you might already be using the performance measurement tool, which is completed by sub-grantees to share information quarterly on numbers reflecting population demographics of clients served and the services they received. And so I just wanted to use this as a quick way to think about the data that you're already probably collecting and just the wealth of information that's available. So just simply by thinking about that data, and you know, you could use it for your annual reports, that this could be for public donors or just outreach efforts. So demonstrating what your center does, how impacts are being made, and then also just comparing that data with other data that's being collected. So maybe your police department has been collecting the number of sexual assault reports they see, and if your advocacy center has a certain number of sexual assault reports they see, your numbers could be different. And so a simple thing of looking at, do your rates compare to what is publicly being shared by the police department, and how can that impact your efforts? Does your data compare with national statistics? Does the, you know, even simple things like the census, if your census data shows that you have a higher ethnic population and you're not seeing that ethnic population at your organization, what efforts can you make to do outreach to encourage that group to come to your organization? So how does your data compare, again, with the locally reported data? Are crime rates and victim reporting rates similar? And then are there other important differences among the people you work with that you may want to track? The other thing we want to point out is it's really helpful to have at least 3 years of information at a time, just so that you can track data over time. 3 years is a good amount that it's usually something that you have or that you can have a goal to have. And so we will be talking about a couple different examples using this method, and then I also have a couple different resources. But first, we are going to have an example from the field. Do you want to introduce yourself?
Hi, everyone. My name is PaHoua Vang. I am the Client Services Coordinator over at SOS Sexual Violence Services here in Ramsey County, and I also am one of the site coordinators for our Ramsey County Sexual Assault Protocol team, or our SART team here. So I'll just share a few examples of how we collect data and such. And one of the most important things when we start collecting data is looking at the purpose of why we collect this data. So for a lot of us advocacy agencies, we have grants that we have to respond to. So we have grant requirements, such as collecting demographics, victimization types, the types of services provided and such. And like Megan said earlier, this data alone can be really insightful for us. So for example, demographics will show us what communities we are seeing and what we're not seeing, or what communities are utilizing our services. So that would show us if we have gaps in services that we need to do more outreach, or maybe it's a training need that we need to do for our service providers because they're not providing culturally competent services or whatnot. And also it could be an opportunity to partner with other organizations. Maybe the community that you are not seeing is going to another service organization. So strengthening those partnerships would be great. So for example, we are sexual violence services. Some programs like us do dual services, but we are funded for sexual violence, and we have another partner here in St. Paul that works with domestic violence. So there's plenty of partnerships and referrals, working together with advocates who are domestic violence and sexual violence for a lot of different cases. And part of this, with this partnership, we started being more intentional about gathering data on the relationship of the offender. So we started, since that's not one of the things that we used to collect, so now we have in our database a specific field for that. And so if they are an intimate partner violence, we will also offer them information and resources for domestic violence. Sometimes it's legal needs that domestic violence survivors, there are different resources for, so we can connect them to that. And so that's one example. And in terms of the criminal legal process, I can jump onto that in the next slide here too, but analyzing data and sharing data, we'll talk about that here. So in Ramsey County, our sexual assault protocol team, or our SART team, has 6 main disciplines that engage in our team. So we have about 30 to 40 agencies represented, and within each different field and the agencies in those fields, there's a wealth of knowledge and data available. So for example, advocacy, we are likely to have information on survivors who have reported and who have not reported. And law enforcement will only have information on those who have reported. And so there are national statistics out there that say anywhere like 80% don't report. So the information you get from law enforcement is usually the information we see out there that's public, but that's only the 20-ish% that do end up reporting. Prosecution, that data is even smaller because there less cases get charged. And then you go into corrections, which is an even smaller amount. And then with medical advocates, with our medical discipline, the sexual assault exams, our agencies are partnered with us. So every time there's someone requesting a sexual assault exam at the hospitals, our programs are automatically called here. So with medical exams, they may or may not report. About 70% of the people seen at one of our big hospitals here do end up reporting to law enforcement. However, the medical pieces usually only account for acute sexual assault cases. So if it happened beyond 5-10 days, they are likely not being seen at a medical facility. And then higher education, as we heard Heidi talking about earlier, this came with a lot of partnerships with students. So one of the things that on our data side that we start collecting is if they are a student, and if they are, we would inform them about their resources on campus, who the confidential resources are, the types of accommodations they could have, and such. So I also have here 2 examples of some the output of some data that we have collected. So this is on just demographics data, but the bottom graph on race, the key is missing, but then the first bar actually represents our county's demographic race proportions. So in Ramsey County, 62% are identified as white, 14 Asian, 12 Black. And then the middle bar represents SOS services of known race provided in 2016, and then the last bar is for those services in 2017 services. So when it comes to communicating, we always have to be cognizant of how we label things. So I put known race of victims, because even though it says we've worked with 52% of our people we've worked with are white, that's only known. And so we've still got a lot of unknowns, but then some key things that do stick out is the difference, the disparities and the gaps between our Asian population. So there's almost 15% of Ramsey County is Asian, but we're only seeing 6-7%. And then of our people are, about 6% of the people that we see that we know their race of, they are Asian, and of almost a quarter of the people that we saw in 2016 that we knew the race of were Black, and that's twice as much as the proportion in Ramsey County. And so these really stuck out as gaps in our services. So these are conversations that we brought forward to our protocol team to let them know, hey, this is what we're seeing. We were also able to get the data from St. Paul Police for the same years. And St. Paul Police, we have about 9 law enforcement agencies in Ramsey County, and St. Paul is the biggest one and accounts for the majority of the sexual assault cases. So what I really appreciate about that is having that relationship with the St. Paul Police Department, that we were able to converse with the investigators and the commander to be able to get that data. So that's one of the key things that I would really stress is building those relationships with your partners. And so what St. Paul Police was able to do is they were able to give us a spreadsheet, all the victim private data removed, of course, but just a spreadsheet of the cases and the victim's age and victim's race. And so by playing with some of that data, we saw there were huge gaps in disparities that were even much more different than what we are seeing here, the gaps. So it kind of shows like the data did show ultimately that Blacks were being, people who were labeled Black in the Excel spreadsheet, that proportion was significantly higher than our county's population proportion. And so we had a very honest conversation about that, what that looks like, and just recognizing that the service providers who are in this space now, law enforcement and advocacy and prosecution, corrections, medical, higher education, oftentimes the people who are providing the services do not reflect the populations of the people who are experiencing the harm. So these were just beginning conversations, and but they are a start, and they can be hard to have, but they are great, and I'm sure there are more resources. I'd be glad to talk to more people about having these types of conversations with your partners. So we can jump to the next slide here. And just more challenges and opportunities. There are limits to the type of information we can collect and document, and we need to be aware of being victim-centered. So even things such as your grant requirements, when you're asked to collect information on age, race, and gender, we always prompt it as, for grant reporting purposes, would you be willing to share X, Y, Z? And if they are, then that's fine. If they're not, then that's fine. Just a reminder that if you are collecting information, make sure you're collecting it with purpose. You don't want to be throwing too many questions at people and not using that data for something. So how are you going to utilize that data? Other questions to always just engage, to ask yourselves and ask of your SART team is, where else can we get information from all your disciplines? How can we improve our communication and trust with partners? And communication of client data can be really different, because for sexual assault advocates, we have a right to confidentiality and privilege that as a practice, we will never share or disclose that we've worked with someone unless that person has given us that consent. Whereas other partners, they may be sharing more information for us, and they might expect, hey, advocates, why aren't you sharing this information back to us? And we'd have to communicate with them, like, we have to ask for explicit consent to be able to share that information. So as long as you have that good communication with partners, that would be good. And most of our partners do understand that they can tell us stuff, but we can't tell them stuff, and that's good. And so engaging our SART team, we did do some of this data presentation about a year ago and presented it back and proposed an idea of creating a data subcommittee. And the purpose of this, and this is an opportunity that we are still trying to work on, is to at least identify what type of data our disciplines are collecting. So I did meet with law enforcement. They shared me the data, the type of data they collect. I met with our local SANE sexual assault program here. They shared with us the type of data they collect. And so this is an ongoing conversation, but the purpose of this would be able to show that this is what sexual violence looks like in our community. And also, we can aggregate that data. So we've got 9 law enforcement agencies, and they may be afraid to share what data they have because they only have 1 or 2 cases a year. But if we aggregate this data, then we can say it's not just that small agency that's having this type of experience, but this is what it looks like for all of our county. And also another huge opportunity is identifying your windows of opportunity to get engaged. So the Ramsey County Attorney's Office recently just released our assistance review of cases of sexual assault cases in our county, and that was a report that was delivered. And what is really great is that we are going to be talking more about that report in depth at our next meeting to identify how we can improve as a system to respond. So, and data will be a huge aspect of that. And that is all I'll share today.
So I had another, so this is Megan. I just wanted to ask can you talk a little bit, just because a lot of our attendees are at the beginning stages, so what kind of spurred the desire to gather the data? Like, did you have an initial question or goal? And can you talk a little bit about that process for everyone?
Yeah, so the reason why I am so passionate about this is because I work in public health. So our sexual assault program is in public health, and my background is in public health. And so I love looking at data and just identifying things like that. So because we have such a great relationship with our sex crimes unit in St. Paul, after some conversations, he was able to share with us and kind of do a fast request on data for us. We were able to get 2 years worth of data on sexual assault cases. And when I started looking at that, I'm like, wow, we've got race data, age data, and I started breaking that down by age group, by race, and I saw a huge gap between who is experiencing sexual assault and what's being reported. So it was so alarming that I saw that the biggest population that was being sexually assaulted, just the raw number, was teenage Black girls. That was the highest number in just raw numbers. So when you compare that to proportion of population, that's going to be exponentially higher. And that was so startling to me, because when I looked at that data, I was very confident that no one else had looked at it and analyzed the data like this, because we had to do a data request to get this information. And I also know that St. Paul Police, they don't have the capacity to be running all these analysis on the data and such. And so to me, this is I am aware of an information that I don't think anyone else is, and I think it's so important that for people to know about it. So that's when we talked with St. Paul and hey, this is what we saw, and we want to share this with the team. And they're go for it. As hurtful as that, as that the data looks, that is the data, that's the reality, that's what we're experiencing, and we need to talk about this. So that's how this conversation came about, because I just ran a data and saw a huge gap, and it was a problem. So
yeah, no, that's really helpful. And I think the other question I wanted you to share a little bit more about is how you've been coordinating the data, and is it within and maybe the relationship with the SART team and the different coordination?
Yeah, so the hard part was that with some challenges is that we do not have the capacity to be doing a lot of these things. And I think a lot of agencies, especially sexual assault advocacy agencies, are already at capacity with a lot of other things, providing direct services and programming, that to do data analysis and collecting that is a different skill set that not all sexual assault agencies have access to. So I know that one thing that we are going forward with is within public health, we are accessing more resources within public health, for data and stuff. And so we are encouraging this to be a priority, so kind of pushing it forward, hey, this is an issue we're seeing. So by doing that, we're getting more people who are paying attention to the data and then paying attention to how much data we don't have. And so something that we are working towards is compiling a report of what that might look like. But it's still difficult to do in the midst with direct services. So there's been conversations also about using special grant funding to apply for some sort of I don't know what that would look like yet, but maybe it could be a data analyzer, someone whose role is specifically to collect this data for a sexual assault team. So that's also an idea that people could think about.
Yeah, that's good. Thank you. Okay, so now we're going to go into two more examples. And before I go there, I just wanted to share this quote that I think is kind of a good example that describes the next example I'm sharing, and then just also in evaluation in general. So when a situation develops gradually, no matter how weird that situation is, you get used to it. So I actually got this in like a daily calendar, just a little quote, but I just thought it reminded me so much of evaluation and of what we're trying to do. So like just as we were discussing, you know, just thinking about as the situations grow, it really takes time to look back and make sure you can make changes and before it starts getting too strange. And so I have another example just using a rape crisis center. And this is just going to show a simple example of measuring growth. And so this is for a rape crisis center, but this could be used in a lot of different organizations. And so this is related with the resource that has been sent. And I'm going to have some different examples of this as we go. But this is an example that's a little bit math heavy, but we don't have to, it's pretty basic math, so you don't have to get too scared of it. But it's just some basic analysis of how growth can impact an organization and how it really is a good idea to take a look at over a couple years of growth and assess how things have changed and how that can impact. So my example is that Sophia, the supervisor, works at the Rape Crisis Center, and she's recently noticed that her two advocates have become extremely busy over the past year. Historically, this organization has only had 2 advocates on staff for the past 10 years, and so they've always had 2, and that's what they've had. That's what their grant funding has had. She believes that an additional advocate is probably needed by now to respond to the increased number of new clients. So she just runs a simple analysis of change over time to determine if the growth has been as big as she thinks it is. She plans on using this analysis to then show her organization's board and eventually funders that additional funding is needed to hire another advocate. So this is where we get to the fun math. So this is just a simple table, and I also attached a spreadsheet that shows how this data was collected. So there's a worksheet that breaks it down, you know, simple just so difference between 2015 and 2014 by taking like 86 minus 78 and you getting the difference. And then also there's an Excel spreadsheet that shows you can plug your own numbers in. And if you have any questions on these, you can always email me for more information. But it's pretty simple, so hopefully it's not too scary. So as you can see, she gathered the numbers that she sends yearly to OJP for her grant. And Sophia puts them into a simple table in Excel, and then she calculates the differences in new clients between each year to compare years. And so this you can see on the left. So there's the new clients and then the difference. So the difference takes the current year and subtracts it from the previous year. And then she also calculated the percentage increase. So sometimes that's a hard number to wrap your head around. So it's thinking about what is the year you're currently in and what was the percentage increase over the past year. So as you can see, the percentage increase from 2015 to 2014 was a little over 10%. And then the next year it got even a little bit bigger. So it was 26.7%. And then the next year it was even a little bit bigger. But so just looking at the numbers a little differently then, I also wanted to show that percentage increase is a hard number to get your head around and percentage difference. So then also thinking about what's the average per advocate. So in 2014, it was 39. So for you had 2 advocates and each advocate had about 39 clients. But then as you see, like just with a little bit of growth each year, you eventually got to where each advocate had 70 new clients. And so that's almost double from 3 years ago. And so this is why it seems like they're more overwhelmed than they used to be. And so to show as an opportunity to show an advocate is needed for a new staff to come on board, I just did the same numbers divided by 3. So hypothetically in 2017, if we would have had 3 advocates on board, we would have had about 47 new clients per advocate. So even though that's higher than 2014, it seems like a more manageable number. And there's a lot of different ways that you can take these numbers. And I mean, you could also include context from just like qualitative data that you gather from just discussions among staff, like saying, oh, this growth seems higher because we have done more outreach. And if that outreach continues to grow, then you know you're even going to need more clients. And, you know, comparing this growth, you could do things like to compare with other communities. So maybe this growth is not crazy and everybody's seeing growth and more advocates are needed. But this is just one example, and the resources really can expand on this example, but some of the math is a little boring to talk about, so you can look at that on your own time.
It's a really good resource.
Yeah, but so hopefully it's useful, and it's a simple way of just thinking about how data that you're already collecting can be looked at to measure just even the status. So I think it's something that, you know, we all sit around at lunch and talk about, oh, we're so swamped, but thinking back, like, are we really? Like, is it something that we've seen growth, and is this something that we need to take action on? So this is a little bit more of a detailed example. And so this is taking, you know, your Excel skills and maybe applying them a little bit more, and maybe you need to have somebody help you do some of this analysis. So as we've been talking about, data does a lot and tells a story. So this is very much fake data, but it could for sure be something that you do at your organization. So we're just using the same location that I've been talking about before, Safe House, which is just a fake organization. But the advocate at this organization was talking with her supervisor. She's brand new, and she had just responded to her first medical case at the local hospital, General Hospital. Since she's brand new, she really wanted to get a sense of, you know, how many cases does she think she's going to be responding to? Should she be, you know, just planning out her day? What should she be expecting as a new person on staff? The supervisor said that overall, for the past 5 years, they've responded to about 10 to 30 cases a year. Not every year is the same, and it's been down a few over the past few years. But usually, as an advocate, you can expect to see 1 to 2 cases at a month that you have to respond to. Every time someone reports to the General Hospital, they for sure call us and we send someone over. So the advocate goes along assuming that every time someone comes into the hospital, Safe House is contacted, she or another advocate responds, and they should be expecting to see 1 to 2 a month. So Amy, I had the advocate's name is Amy the advocate, so Amy goes along with this, and she assumes to be responding to all the hospital SANE exams. A few weeks later, as she's meeting with a different client, the client discusses that at their SANE exam at General Hospital, they wish that they had had an advocate present. So this is just a general client had showed up at their organization. This was not someone that the advocate had seen at the hospital, and the advocate was concerned that the client had wished they had had an advocate and one wasn't there. The advocate begins to worry that this is happening more and more, so she does an analysis. This analysis is a comparison of the counts that the organization had compared to what the hospital had. So this is a good example of the hospital was willing to share their data, and so maybe they were part of a SART team or they were starting to get a SART going, but they were having some relationship started. And so as you can see, like 2011 and 2012, every time a SANE exam was done at the hospital, there was almost always an advocate from the Safe House there. But then something started to happen after 2013. The General Hospital was still seeing growth of exams, but they weren't seeing as many as advocates responding to those exams. So this is where the supervisor had said that, yeah, it had been down a couple of years, but nothing crazy. Oh, sorry. There was, numbers had been down, but there was nothing crazy, so there was nothing you needed to worry about. So, but unfortunately, without comparing these, you weren't seeing that there was a large growth at the hospital that wasn't matching up with advocates responding. And so this is where you can start taking action and start getting communications together with your group to figure out what's happening. So just brainstorming around our office, we were talking about there's a lot of different things that could be happening. You know, maybe the advocacy organization had lost funding, and 2 years ago they had limited advocate availability, and so the hospital had just assumed that that's what was happening. Or, you know, maybe the hospital had a bad experience with one advocate, so instead of calling at certain times, they just didn't. You know, maybe there could be different, so it could maybe be a personnel issue or just miscommunication between hospitals and organizations. But this could be just the tip of the iceberg of how to provide better care from the advocacy organization for the hospital. So this is, again, just like one example of data that was already being collected. So they marked, the advocacy organization was marking down how often they went to the hospital, and the hospital was also marking every time that they had an exam. And also, this is one point, you know, even just data tracking, we were discussing this example, and someone said that sometimes, you know, if you are an advocate responding to a SANE exam, when it's been a long exam and you forget to mark it down. So maybe advocates have been responding, but it wasn't being tracked. So there's a lot of different things that this could be looked at. But so this is just one example, and this was just a simple plotting in Excel and using graphs, and so this wasn't too crazy, but it was something that hopefully you could do.
And it's something I know that with Microsoft Word also, you can create charts now. So there's lots of different ways you can approach visualizing this data. All right. Well, we're wrapping up. We're at the last stretch of the webinar here, but we just wanted to say a couple of things that we don't want you to forget about as you go forth and start collecting information to help make changes in your communities. So PaHoua talked a little bit about this, but we do really need to, when you're working with folks in communities, and if you engage victim survivors in your work, you do need to get permission to use the information they share with you. If you need sample consent forms, I can certainly share those with you, but that is really important. Accountability. So thinking about once you get this train, you start the planning phase and you get this train start moving along, how do you keep people on track, and how do you keep people accountable to what they say they're going to do to help you? And how do you keep people focused on your end goal, your evaluation question? It's important to think about how do you keep that moving and who's in charge of that? Being able to generalize your information. So the things you find in your community, once you create your findings, you can't really say with any certainty that that would be the same in other communities. So just be wary of generalizing what you find, and know that context and local information is really valuable, and really apply that and use that there. Acknowledge when you're talking about this, or when you write a report, or even kind of going in initially, acknowledge your limitations, do your best to work on that and try to make improvements, but limitations are just going to be there. You're going to have, you know, just a certain number of people participating, or you're going to have a certain amount of expertise involved, et cetera, et cetera. So, and that's okay. Every study or every evaluation has some kind of limitations. Also, the other thing I want to note is, especially with mapping, there is that possible bias of participants that might come into play, and kind of when you're sharing kind of perspectives. Remember that we all just have a particular slice of the pie, and we need to bring everybody's perspectives together to start understanding the whole picture. But there are biases that participants may be coming and thinking about how do we navigate that, especially as we kind of move towards understanding what and making meaning of our evaluation results. And again, I'm going to say it again because I say this all the time: use information to make changes and improve, or highlight, you know, what's going well. It's so important to use the information that you find. That's respectful. That's ethical. Don't collect information if you're not going to use it to improve. And get help if you need it. We're all here for you. John Anagans is here for you. we have many resources, and on the web, in print. We often have phone calls with folks and talk through and do troubleshooting. We'll connect you with other people in the field who are trying to do the same thing that you're doing. There's a whole community of people who are doing evaluation in the field right now, so don't be afraid to reach out and chat with us. On the web, our resources, the Are We Making a Difference Online, which is a whole learning page that is kind of an e-learning, online learning resource where you can see videos of people who've been engaging in evaluation. You can try out your own evaluation. So it's kind of a choose your own adventure in 3 different scenarios. There's some overviews in evaluation there. It's a great resource for you. We have several webinars as well that I realize I didn't put the link on this page for. Oh, thank you. And John Anna's going to send it in the chat. And in print, we have the Are You Making a Difference resource guide for leading teams in evaluating system change efforts. And we can send multiple copies out to you with no cost. So no, we're here for you in personal resources, and we have physical resources as well. We also just wanted to take a few minutes to open up a space for all you to participate. Do you have other things that you've tried in your community to kind of assess the system response or assess what's happening in your community? What questions or thoughts do you have for us? Any, or you could also ask for any thoughts or questions from our guests as well.
So please feel free to chat in if you have any questions you want us to address right now on anything we talked about today or any other questions you might have.
This is Heidi. I did just want to address, I know that there's a question that came in when I was talking about costs associated with SANE exams. And we know that SANE exams should be not charged to the victim when they go in, but we also want to be transparent with our student victims that there may be costs sometimes associated with medications or ongoing medical care that they may need. And so we just want to be upfront with them too that there may be some costs associated with those. So that is what I meant when we talked about the charges and not charges with SANE exams.
I also have a question here, and maybe PaHoua might be willing to address this. How can I get my team to buy into collecting information and comparing data? Do you have any thoughts on how you're thinking about it or how you've done some of the work?
Yeah, so when we last had this conversation, I think people were interested in it. I also think that a lot of people feel already swamped for the things that they have to do, that I don't think people felt that they could volunteer their time to jump in and do data work. And so that's why I think that's where we are at now. In terms of getting buy-in, I think it really stressing the importance of how we're going to use this data to better improve our services and our coordination and such. For example, some of the information that we collect, so when I met with the SANE programs, the SANE nurse started noticing, I kept hearing a lot of people talking about they met this person online and such. So she started collecting, as one of their questions was, did you meet this person online? And if yes, what website and stuff like that. But, and although with that data, we aren't sure what to do with it yet, but it's becoming something that that was enough for us to identify that this is common. Or at least we've been seeing it common for a little bit. Same with seeing people who've been experiencing homelessness. We started tracking that after just noticing in our work, this person that we saw was homeless, and we just saw this other person who was experiencing homelessness too. So, yeah, I think it's just being able to. Oh, my example. So when I talked with other law enforcement agencies, they're like, yeah, this is really great, but I don't think we can give you all the same data because I don't know how our database works. So each law enforcement agency, they also have different types of database too. So for them to output the data back for us is going to be different. And so part of our purpose was having this committee would be to identify those and come to a clear consensus. Hey, how about every quarter or something, everyone shoots us back these data points. From this discipline we want this, from that discipline we want this. So I think part of it is just maybe setting up the system for people to get it going. I think once people start seeing the benefit of that, I think they might be more engaged in it.
It sounds like you're feeling the need to put in some work ahead of time to kind of demonstrate that it's possible.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And that's something I commonly see with teams is that sometimes the team coordinator or a couple people within the team who are really dedicated and can see the benefits of doing some kind of evaluation and data collection kind of work, they need to put a little extra time in and just move that work forward. And then when you get to the reflection phase of your plan, do, reflect, apply cycle, when they start reflecting on the data, that's when they really see the benefits. And then it creates a buy-in for the next time around. So you can kind of bite off a smaller chunk and start moving some of that work forward, and then folks will be more willing to buy in as you move forward with your team, because it's a process, right? Like the team is not, it's not an end product, it's a continual process, and buying into the processes and being committed and building that process is really, really important. Yeah, I think that that's all the questions we have for today. Let's see here. We just want to say thank you, and that we do provide support for SART, large and small, new and old, all over the country and territories, and sexual assault programs in Minnesota. Feel free to contact us for support or any additional tools. And our panelists have told us that they are available to answer questions and support folks as well. So thank you, everybody, for being with us today. Bye now.